1999. I started my company in 2002. I've appraised everything from the burnout on the corner to it was known the $20 million mansion. So I've done several thousand appraisals over the years. I've done work with major banks, national banks, local banks, attorneys, financial planners, and CPAs for estates and divorces. So into the legal end as well as the lending end. That's it.
Awesome.
So, my name is Ivan Believ. I manage a law office for the past close to 15 years now. We're a real estate centric firm. We focus on real estate transactions representing first time home buyers, second time home buyers, and investors. We represent everything from transactions on vacant lots to first 1-2 family homes to commercial strips throughout the 5 boroughs: Nassau, Suffolk County, Westchester County. And the other half of the office focuses on litigation, landlord-tenant litigation, mortgage foreclosure defense, and more complex real estate litigations.
Awesome. Thank you, Ivan.
Hi, Chris Morabito. Most of you guys know me. I'm here all the time. Loan officer. I offer essentially every lending product under the sun that you could imagine for every unique scenario. Happy to be here and answer some of you guys' questions.
All right, awesome. Well, welcome. Hi, Brenda Solomon. All right, so like I said, we're doing things a little bit differently. Instead of me reading out the questions from the papers that I have here, I did like a spin the wheel type of thing, right? So we're going to ask, it's gonna pop up randomly, any question, and whoever pertains to will answer the question. Okay, ready? Right, let's do this.
Like the Wheel of Fortune.
Always get new creative ways, gotta do it differently. Let's see. Who can perform a real estate appraisal?
Okay. Now, this is a touchy situation with agents because everybody thinks a CMA is an appraisal. It's not. It's your CMA is an estimate of value that you think that you can basically get somebody when you list a house. This is what I think it's worth. This is how much I can sell it for. An appraisal can only be done by either a licensed to certified appraiser, commercial or residential. We're licensed through the state. We have to, like your license, have to take continuing education, take a lot of different other courses as far as valuation. We have to comply with what we call USPAP, which is the Uniform Standards of Appraisal Practice, professional appraisal practice, where it's basically the law of the land. It's works under the federal banking law. We have to make sure that we adhere to the Fannie Mae underwriting guidelines, the FHA underwriting guidelines, and in cases of divorce estate, where we can give legal and expert testimony as the appraisal process and how we come to a value, and which is a very long and lengthy process. As everybody's saying, oh, the appraiser was here yesterday. When am I going to have the report tomorrow? No. Just in research and writing the report is hours and hours of work. So that's why we're licensed and have to be licensed by the state and nationally. And any questions regarding that? That's just a brief overview.
Do you have a question?
I have a question for attorney.
Go ahead.
So in the morning, I read this article in regards to a largest class action suit against the realtors. That's coming out, it's in the works right now, whereby if an agent gets a listing, let's say 6%, and there is no other agent on the buyer side, the homeowners went after the agent and sued for the remaining of the commission. So because when you're sitting at the listing appointment, not after the listing, you divide half of the portion technically to an MLS, cooperating agent, should they bring a buyer. Since there was no buyer on that end, and someone called on the sign or through advertisement, now you are so-called a dual agent, collecting both sides of the commission. The homeowners went about and sued for that commission.
Back.
Get that commission back.
After the
After the
closing
close.
occurred, after they pay the commission.
Correct. Is it, would you shed some light, is there something that in the works that you might know of? Cause more and more I hear about this is the biggest action suit in America so far.
So I personally think that real estate agents and brokers alike, sometimes unnecessarily, and I'm not sitting here because I'm in a real estate real estate brokerage office. Sometimes they get a bad rap because people forget how much time a realtor sits and conducts showings, listings, puts money out of pocket before they actually get to the closing table. And I think I said this to Leah a little while back. I had one realtor actually sit down and cry to me years ago that after she calculated all the hours she spent to get to one closing, she was making an hourly wage of maybe $25 an hour. And she was very upset about it. So I think realtors in general, they might be a target for something, a lawsuit of this magnitude. It's gonna come down to an interpretation of the listing agreements, the contracts, and the fact that once the closing has taken place, there's a plethora of case law that says once the closing has taken place, checks have been cut, everybody's claims against each other have been extinguished. That's not just between buyer and seller on a leak that occurred 4 days after a closing. That is against the bank, that is against the realtors, because once you cut those checks, you've already agreed to their validity. Any dispute that you may have had should have occurred, in my opinion, before the closing. Now, if there's going to be a twist in this proposed class action of, for example, fraud or misrepresentation where they would not have known of something prior to the closing, an aggressive plaintiff's firm may twist it that way and try to circumvent what's otherwise a waiver of all claims as in the day of the closing. So
would you advise the agents here to, or us also, to add another page into our listing agreement stating something of such matter in regards to agent, besides agency disclosure? Because I know a lot of agents, a lot of homeowners, when they see 5-6% and you have a, $2 million house, so it doesn't matter how much the house is, it's a large chunk of change. At closing, when they calculating the estimate of net, and they see a 53,000, 62,000 coming to an agent, and sometimes it takes literally a week to sell a house. Sometimes it takes 7 months to sell a house. We never know, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, homeowners feel like, what did you do? You just showed a house to 5 buyers and you own so much money, and they feel like there's no other agent on the other side. What can we do to protect our side, in your opinion?
So we're in New York City.
Yeah.
And we have such a flexible legal system where anybody can sue anybody for anything at any point in time.
Yeah.
Even if it's beyond the 6-year statute of limitation, right? Sometimes you can file these kind of cases and you have to prove that it's been more than 6 years. It's been an old case. Why do I bring this up? It may be worth to add another disclosure, because the more you protect yourself, the better off you'll be. Yeah, you're gonna have some sellers with remorse. Oh, you sold my house in a month.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? You're lucky they sold it for a month. You're lucky you live in a certain neighborhood that can move a market that quickly.
Maybe because of the hard work of the agent, you got it sold that quickly.
There's a lot of factors.
So you should be thankful, but one is you should be thankful, right? Not
I don't see it that way. That's the problem.
Yeah. So it's always worth to add another disclosure and be as open as possible with the homeowners. But like everything else, you also have to walk a fine line. Don't put too much into an additional disclosure, which may open up a can of worms. But it's definitely worth it to.
But in the exclusive right to sell agreement, it says there, the first line, that they paid a total of commission to that particular agent, and then from that total, it gets divided. So that first line that's already there is already protected. Now they're just trying to find a loophole by saying, oh,
There was no other agent.
it doesn't matter, that's why the first line it says there that your total commission is owed, and then from that total commission, this and this and this broken down. There's a seller agent, there's a buyer agent, there's a broker agent. You're not coming in as a dual agent, you're coming in as a seller's agent.
But there's going to be a very strict interpretation of that listing agreement. And it might expose a lot of realtors and brokerages to
I
liability.
want to add something. Okay, so let's say then that I have a contract with a seller. and there are no only me can sell it.
An exclusive agreement.
So obviously, all that, argument falls down, because the contract is between the agent or the agency and the seller, 6%, 7%, 10%.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
No. There are cases that they do deals for 10%, but we're.
There on residential, there are caps. There.
Yeah.
Is there a cap?
That's an agreement. It's an agreement.
I think you can push it 8, but I think the cap is 6. It's something that I have to check it though. For a certain period of time, there was a cap at 6. If that's changed, I don't know. I don't look at these agreements at all.
So if the seller saying, we give this back, and we have sold, give you commission, and it comes out, let's say, 2 times, you have to.
Yeah, you know what? You have to take a look and be very careful with that agreement. As long as they sign an agreement to that effect. And it can be twisted against you, but I would tread very carefully. I would tread very carefully.
Guys, let's just be reasonable.
And especially since 2016, especially 2019. Governor Cuomo changed a lot with that law, and he's opened up liability to a lot of people, a lot of professionals especially. The bar is against us.
It's not looking for the wheel. The contracts are still standard, why can't some?
Yeah.
Why can they be signed the same day? Why does it take 2 weeks for an attorney to get back? Or, with one line.
You guys understood the question?
Yeah.
All right.
So just.
There's a reason why you have an orange chair anyway.
And I end up here. Just for purpose of being dramatic, I'm gonna actually read this question. This is my favorite question. If all contracts are standard, which they're not, why can't they be signed the same day? All right. First of all, not one buyer wants a paralegal or an assistant or a secretary reading their contracts and marking it up, even though a lot of the changes that attorneys make are very similar. There's a 4 or 5 page standard contract. And seller's attorneys add what's called a rider. Sometimes there's more than one rider. Those riders are anything but standard. And attorneys can get very creative to add language that would waive a buyer's rights that they otherwise have in law. I'll give you an example. If you're selling a home, it's usually in its as-is condition, which means if there's a leak, if there's a broken kitchen cabinet, you're buying it with those conditions. But sometimes you're buying a new development, a new construction project. Those, by operation of law, can never be sold as is. And a lot of people either don't like it or they don't know it. If you're gonna sell a new construction, a brand new construction, there's gonna be post-closing several years of warranties that the contractor and seller must provide to the buyers. That's not in just in real estate law, but in the general obligations law.
On the new house, on the
For new constructions. You're not even allowed to say, I waive my right to the new construction laws.
So PCDA not gonna work $500?
No way.
Oh,
You're gonna sell a $5 million house here in Jamaica Estates that was just built. And you're gonna collect a crazy return on your investment. You will be giving, in some instances, a 6-year warranty of mercantability. There's different warranties in general obligations law that you are giving to the buyers.
As an agent, would you advise us as a realtor, would you advise a realtor to mention it on the listing appointment? Are we allowed to mention the listing appointment to the seller to say, oh, would you mind, or is the warranty would be included in your house when you sell? Can we represent it to the buyer that the seller is giving you a 2-year? Can we involve us is the question before the attorney?
I think that the realtors have a very important function because you are the first point of contact for everybody. And the information that you give to the sellers is going to take this contract to the finish line. If you find it valuable, depending on how you feel out your client, that you will advise them of these rules, you can, there's nothing against it, but it's definitely gonna be their attorney's responsibility. The reason that I bring up this warranty issue is that we recently had a contract where, and it goes to this question, why can't a contract be signed the same day? And this new construction, just an example. We had a contract for a new construction here in Fresh Meadows. This guy wanted to live right next to a temple. He wanted to live next to a temple. It was a new construction house, and the seller's attorney says, you're buying it as is, we're not responsible to give you a certificate of occupancy. No problem. But I'm gonna review that contract, because if my client moves in and there's no CO, there's actually a criminal offense on that.
Against who?
I can show you an email where it's everybody involved, including the attorneys, to allow somebody to move into a house with no CO. Now, before 1940, 1935, there were no COs on a DOB records. So you can get what's it called? That's what it was. Dan more maps, well, and more maps are with the surveys. Letter of no objection, that's what I was looking for. But they tried to sell this house with no CO after it being built brand new. They didn't want to give, they wanted to reduce the warranties from 6 years to 1 year. But even if we were to include that in the contract, that's not an enforceable term. And you have serious legal issues for the attorneys involved if you let them move in with no CO. And I think somebody with a lot of experience in this area, Anthony, you might add 2 points to this issue, no?
I also, I'm a New York State Code Enforcement official. I do plans examination. I was a building inspector for a building department.
Oh,
Unfortunately, what happens is, once you take possession of the house, guess what? You own it. You own all the problems. You own all the violations. You own. Becomes your problem. And both Christian and I will tell you how many times, you buy a house now, you close on it, and you want to do some improvements on it, you go to the building department, you want to get a permit, they come back, well, surprise. That nice little family room off the back of the house, well, there's no certificate for that. It was built without a permit. Why did my title insurance pick it up? Well, title insurance looks for violations, open permits, permits that are expired, permits that were never closed. They're not looking for something, they can't look for something that was built without a permit that wasn't picked up. But when you apply for a building permit, now, New York City, I'm not too familiar with how they work in New York City, so I can't speak down in New York City. In Nassau, Suffolk County, when you're dealing with the towns and villages, they're gonna do a review of it, they're gonna pull out the building file, they're gonna say, okay, here's the plans I got from the architect, and we're gonna look at the historic record, I'm like. Last set of plans we have on this house was from 1949. And it was a cape. I'm looking at a house that has 2 stories, 4 bathrooms, 3 extensions, and there's nothing on file. So now. You have to legalize the whole house, basically. And that can get into a lot of money and a lot of time. So, as far as certificates of occupancy is concerned, when you get a house that's being built new, goes through the plan process, goes through the review process, you get the permits, they build the house, goes through all the inspections. The builder says, well, I made this change. Well, you didn't tell us you made the change. We can't sign off on the project until you submit an amendment and get that done. Well, if you can't close out the project, you can't get a certificate of occupancy. It's illegal to move into a house without a certificate of occupancy on a new construction, or a house that's a new, it could be even a new home on an existing foundation. And you can run into some very serious fines and time of getting an attorney, going to court, if you move into a house without a certificate of occupancy. So that's why it's important to make sure that you have a certificate, they have to be sure the builder. Can't let you, they can't even close without a certificate of occupancy. No matter what the agreement may be between the buyer and the seller.
Will the insurance be obtained?
I'm sorry?
Will the insurance be obtained? No.
Nope, insurance will not, they won't give you a policy without a certificate of occupancy. If the house was built prior to 1930 or 1938, in New York City, I know there were no certificates of occupancy before 1960. So I go on the deal, if I'm researching a property, I go on, I'll get an appraisal order. It's a 2-family house. You know, it's a townhouse, you know, the ones without a basement, the walk-in level has, you know, everybody makes that up. Well, you know what? I go on the DOB website and there's a certificate of occupancy from 1966. First floor is a rec room.
Well, I have that now.
Well, guess what? I can't appraise it as a 2-family because it's legal use as a 1-family. Now it's a single family with an accessory dwelling in it. And that opens up a whole other can of worms, especially if you're dealing with FHA. Which is 4-hour seminar.
With all the rates, market's changing, appraisal comes out to the property. And usually we like to help the appraiser if it comes, you know, what's going on in the neighborhood, especially if they don't live in the neighborhood. 2-part question. A, if the appraiser does not look at our comps that we presented, under appraises the house 20-40 grand, it becomes an issue with the bank. Part one. Second part, how do appraisers look at seller's concession? A lot of agents always have this misconception. So let's say a purchase accepted offer is 500,000, but they wanted for loan of 530,000 to put the closing cost.
Right.
Chris can put, you know, put that.
So it's been said, right?
Seller's concession.
No, I bought my house in
Yeah,
1990.
so an appraiser comes out now and only appraises it at 500.
Okay,
Where the seller's concession must be appraised, it's not, how does it work?
the seller's concession and appraisers say it differently. But in every report, my report says the seller's concession is not a reflection of marketability or value. Because you're selling, the seller's giving you a concession, basically saying, you know what? In order to make this deal work, I'm gonna concede $10,000 to you, $15,000, 2%, 1%, whichever the agreement is. It has, that does not have an effect on value, can't be considered in the value. The value is the value. So
Every appraiser knows that? That's
you should know it.
Can we contest it with them or?
Well, the only way you can contest the value and the way it works is, say you have a sale price of $540,000. Appraiser comes back, it's 520,000. Okay, you could say, well, the appraiser, we have this comp here, and this comp here, and this comp here, and the appraiser didn't use this comp. You can go to the bank and you can say, we'd like to reconsider the value. Provide that proof that you have, that goes through the underwriting, goes through the appraisal management company, then it goes back to the appraiser. The appraiser looks at it and says, well, I looked at this comp. And in the response, you would write either A, I looked at this comp, I didn't consider it, I missed this comp, and now I added it into the report, and I've done that. I've gone both ways. I've said, I've considered the report, and this is why it wasn't comparable to the subject. And why I chose the other comparables, because there's a process to that, choosing comparables. And or I can say, like I said, okay, I missed that one, I'll add it in, and yes, the value can increase to, I can appraise it for $5,000, $10,000, 20, whatever it is. Or I can say, you know what? After I plug it in and do all the adjustments, it actually hurts the value. Because I might be appraising an 1,800 square foot colonial, you give me a 3,000 square foot colonial, it's across the street. Well, if you have those adjustments, all of a sudden you just adjusted down 30,000. So
But seller's concession,
it has no
it
effect
does not
on,
have an issue.
it should have an effect.
So if tenant says, have seller's concession, it should not, as a realtor, should not worry whether it's gonna appraise or not.
As the appraiser, As the appraiser, I usually don't know there's a seller's concession until I get the contract and I have to analyze it. So then I see there's a seller's concession, okay, that's fine. My value is based on what that purchase price is.
So how does?
I mean, I consider what that purchase price is the purchase price. I don't consider the seller's concession, well, you have a seller's concession, I don't think it's worth it, or I subtract the seller's concession out of that. It's there, that's between the buyer and the seller. What's happening is the buyer goes, well, I need an extra 15,000 to close because I wanna build that into my mortgage. And the seller goes, okay, we'll give you the $15,000 concession, but we wanted 500, now we want 515. If the house appraised, I don't know what goes on in those negotiations. We can't have conversations or about any deal with the originators. So basically, it's like, okay, is the house worth 515? Right, but in today's seller, you know, you list the house for 499, they're expecting to get 580. You know.
In regards to seller concessions, I just want to talk a little bit about how it is looked at from the lending perspective. So of course, realtor's job is to go negotiate the price in terms of a sale, right? And how you all talk to your sellers and your buyers about price and seller concessions on your end of the business is not something that I'm particularly aware of in terms of the conversations of negotiating. But on the lending side, this is how it works definitively. All right. The sale price is the sale price. If it's 500, it's 500. If you're saying it's 510 because there's a $10,000 seller concession, the lawyer makes the purchase price 510. With lending law, whether it's any conforming loan, non-QM, whatever it is, the concession is something from the purchase price and then net to seller is lower. Think about the English language sense of the word itself. It is a seller concession. The seller is conceding something. They are giving something. So from the lending perspective, you're selling a house for 800, there's a 20,000 seller concession. Well, no, you're selling the house for 820. It must appraise for 820. Why? Because on the lending side, loan to value, LTV, which is one of the metrics and attributes of does this loan qualify? There are minimums. FHA is 96.5, it's at least 3.5% down. Conventional, if you're first time home buyer, is 97%, most times 95 if you're not a first time home buyer, et cetera, et cetera. The point is how does a lender calculate LTV? Why do you end up with appraisal issues? LTV is based upon the lower of the purchase price or the appraisal price. So everybody can negotiate seller concessions higher than purchase price all they want, but if it doesn't appraise, then you have an LTV issue, which means you can't lend. So in my opinion, kind of moral of this little conversation is be realistic with your values and your prices. You can't build in seller concessions above and beyond what you reasonably think the house will appraise at, and then expect somehow that it's going to be massaged and work out. You know, it's the seller conceding something.
But
How you guys negotiate it on your end is a different story, but that's what it is.
But David, other thing is as follows, a house is 800,000.
Mhm.
You do an open house, there's a line out the door, let's just give you an example.
Yeah,
You have an 840 now,
okay,
okay, with seller's concession comes to 870. They want to buy and the second backup buyer is the same thing, but maybe 10,000 less. So buyers are overbidding the property and they want, let's say, the seller's concession. How do we fit into the equation? So why is the owner or us getting the short end of the stick? And the consumers there are bidding over it. I know there's very few left of bidding overs now,
yeah,
but
well,
that's the issue.
yes, you're talking about if a property is listed at a certain price and then it gets overbid, and then how does that affect seller concession and all this? So again, I don't want anybody to overcomplicate the combination of price and seller concession. Like I said, simplify it in your mind. If you have a property that you're negotiating a price and then you're adding a seller concession on top of it, but you're trying to net the seller a particular amount, I mean, all of that is great in terms of your negotiating, but when it comes down to that contract, price is the top line number. It must appraise for that top line number. And as far as short end of the stick goes, it comes down to appraisal standards and how they're required to appraise a house. It's worth what it's worth according to whatever guidelines they have to follow.
There's a lot of guidelines.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes after the appraisal comes in. Sorry.
I always find it strange, you're calling it a seller's concession, and if you add in the price, how are you conceding on your, if you're adding what's the thing with concession?
So I actually want to chat about that for a second, and I don't like to get into this topic all that much because of the way that our the market kind of operates. But the way the lending laws are written, I can assure you it is a concession. It is the seller conceding something.
Yes.
I assure you. Okay, the fact that in practice, people structure it in a different way
Add it back.
is kind of not technically in the spirit of the way that the regs are written.
Exactly.
100%. I'm well aware. I see it all the time. That's why I'm not on your side of the business. From my perspective, it's purchase price is this, seller concession is less than this. It is what it is. Because, and if you want me to really give you kind of, again, the spirit behind that, right? A seller concession is a seller conceding something to the buyer. And in the world of lending, we are not allowed to allow a purchaser to finance their closing costs. Technically. Okay, now in cases of refinances, you can roll them in and this and that, but you know, the example that I'm giving in terms of that technically is, you're buying a house for $750,000, you need 30 grand in closing costs. You know, we can't then lend you 15,000 to cover your closing costs, because then your loan to value is no longer within the threshold of what's for lending regulation. And then interestingly enough, that concept goes completely out the window in terms of financing closing costs if you are putting down more than the minimum down payment as a buyer. Why? Because if you're putting down 10% and then you're short on closing costs, well then guess what, Mr. Buyer? You're putting down 7% instead of 10. You know, and you're 3%. So you're 100% correct. The spirit of the way the lending regulation is written is the seller is conceding something to the buyer.
I have a question. Go back to that topic. We're talking about violation. Let's assume, for you, sorry. If we have a property, right? And buyer aware of the no CO, and he's okay with that. So how it's gonna work? We're responsible after when he purchased the house? What happened? I mean, as an agent, what responsibility we have?
Well, that's more of a legal.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, are you asking if the agents are going to have any liability for selling a house to a buyer with no CO?
For instance, if I have a listing and buyer aware of that, no CO, and somehow it shouldn't work out because maybe cash deal.
I can't envision that the realtor is on the hook for that. I don't, because there's too many steps after you introduce the parties where attorneys get involved, where they have a certain fiduciary duty and obligations to browbeat their clients about buying a house with no, you can buy a house with no CO, but as you know, my colleague here said, you shouldn't be moving into it. It's not just illegal, but there's a nuance. It's actually a criminal code that will bring everybody into the into court for allowing somebody to move into a house with no CO.
My question is, even buyer know about that? So
There are
when-
situations where you can buy a house without a CO. You got an investor, he's gonna knock the house down.
This difference is,
Yeah.
you can buy a house with no CO. It's a matter of if you are going to be silly enough to move into it knowing of the liability.
Occupying the property.
So that's the buyer's responsibility and down the road.
I think the attorneys are gonna be held responsible for that. And Solomon, the example that I gave, we actually had this situation where it was a new construction, it was sold to a buyer. This buyer was on a brink of moving in, knowingly not having a certificate of occupancy. He knew. It's like, you know, you're running a red light. You're still gonna be fined, right? So you knew you're moving into a house with no certificate of occupancy.
I have a question for you. I have like one of those spicy questions.
Okay,
Nothing personal, it's not, didn't happen with you.
Keep my fingers crossed.
We signed a contract. The buyer's attorney did not fully look at the contract. Let the buyer sign the contract, deposit, everything goes through, all of a sudden towards closer to the closing, found out there was solar panels on the roof. Right? Listen, this is for all the agents, so you guys know, when you go to listing it. Now, the solar panels have a balance to a closing, let's say 20 grand, I'm just making up a number. Everybody, of course, turns to the realtor because the checks are the biggest one at the realtor. So, you know, that the agents kick in, you know, the two agents, let them split it. And that's it. Can we now turn around and sue the attorney that didn't check the contract and mistakenly, not mistakenly, but,
Feisty question.
yeah, I know.
So let's break it down. You asked, can we go off and sue the attorney?
Well,
The realtors, you
the
mean?
realtors, yeah,
I mean, the realtors don't really have a privity of contract with the attorneys. They don't have,
but you, now because of your action of negligence, you are causing us, to lose the entire commission.
It's gonna
because
be
of the buyer work. or
it's
can
gonna
we
be.
give a discount, 20 grand, can we now go after you?
So these solar panels that are on homes, many times at the closing, there's going to be a lease. Or some sort of, maybe lease is not the right word, there's a contract or a payment plan, a repayment plan, sorry. Oftentimes, the payoff on those solar panels are gonna be higher than these commissions. Does that mean that the broker is gonna forego their entire commission? That, there's no logic to that. So I can't agree with that scenario, why it would play out that way. Oftentimes at a table, an investor or somebody wants to be a heavy hitter or wheeler dealer. Oh, I didn't expect this call, you chip in, you chip in, you chip in. That's what I call circus. It just,
That's what happens every
That's not what happens.
single time.
it happens, and unfortunately, it's not supposed to be that way. Okay. The solar panels should have been identified when you signed the contract. Whether the purchaser himself saw them, if it's a pitched roof and you can see it, or the inspection, which should have taken place, would have pointed out the solar panels, right? You have an engineer, an inspector. Somebody should be advising the buyer there's solar panels. That's one. Two, even after you sign the contract, there's going to be a title report that's called, that's going to show a UCC, Uniform Commercial Code lien on the property, right? You've seen this. That shows, oh, there's a lien from, you know, XYZ solar panel company. Well, now we have actual notice, although it's late notice. Well, we should have known this, but now we do know. This should not have just come up 24 hours before closing. When you signed the contract, you should have had an inspection done, and I beg, don't wait on the inspection and don't forego the inspection, because you may have information that you didn't know. In a solar panel, it's up on a roof. You may not have seen it up there. You checked the attic, you checked the basement, but you didn't see the solar panels. If there's a device on the side of the house, there's just a visual inspection would identify an issue. That's one of the many reasons this should not have come up at the closing. That's a huge oversight, unfortunately, on one of my colleagues. It's an oversight on an inspector. And Solomon, I'm glad I got you smiling back there.
Listen, all of the scenarios I'm giving you.
So they're real scenarios.
They're real scenarios, I'm not making them up.
I will say one last thing about, I'm sorry, about the solar panels. Oftentimes, those contracts are now assigned and transferred over to the new owners, who should have to pay a monthly or quarterly payment on it every time after the closing. They didn't quantify, they didn't calculate for this when they were applying for their mortgage, when they were all making the offer on the house. So we have to have full disclosure to these buyers.
I would find it, to add on to what you were just saying, I would find it unlikely that it would go that far to the closing table if the deal required financing. Because on the lending side, so everybody knows solar panels are either leased or financed. Okay, and if there's any payment associated with it, lending must include it in our DTI calculation. So we get a title report with the UCC, now we know there's solar, the real estate agent didn't tell me. Now I'm calling up the listing agent asking, hey, can you get me a copy of the original lease or purchase agreement for the solar panels, and it's going into the borrower's DTI. So, and then I've seen situations where it then creates an issue for qualifications because somebody didn't identify that there were solar panels.
You know what's funny? This might circle us back to why contracts should not be signed 24 hours with.
Yes.
Exactly why it should not be signed the same day, because everybody is rushed just to get that deposit across the table. And these are the things that happen, and people ignore it until the closing. And lenders don't know about this. It's not fair to them, because then they're gonna withdraw on their commitment. And many people don't understand what it means when a commitment is issued and then withdrawn. So,
And there's an appraisal end of that with the solar panels also. I get that, well, you didn't take into consideration the solar panels and the value. Well, the solar panels do have no contributory value.
No?
In an appraisal.
Wow.
Okay, they try to tell you, oh, I invested in it, because leased, whether they're leased or purchased, it's not public record. We can't verify we can't verify any of the transactions.
So is it an add-on price?
It's not, no.
Really?
We do, it's not considered, there's no, you cannot, our adjustments have to be extracted out of the market. Okay, I just can't say, oh, well, it costs 40,000, solar panels, that's worth 25,000. That's not how it works. We have to extract that value of the contributory value to the real estate. That's why an above ground pool has no contributory value. Above ground, in-ground pool is a structure. It's a structure, so it's not personal property. Solar panels, if they're leased, it's personal property. I don't want them anymore. You come take them down. So solar panel, I have that. If I appraise a house with solar panels, I have certain comments I put into the appraisal stating that solar panels have no contributory value in the valuation.
As people that have, many of us, many of the agents have a struggle of appraising or doing a estimate on the property. Where market fluctuates sometimes, or there's a house that was built correctly, or everything that was built, but nobody else built it the same time, right? So what adds to the value? How far can we go out?
Okay. So basically you have a neighborhood. Every neighborhood has boundaries.
Correct.
I'm not gonna go into Briarwood to appraise something in Jamaica Estates, even though it might be across the street.
But what if there are no counts in Jamaica State for that house, but private has it?
Well, that's a whole different, if it's a unique house, and it's a very complex appraisal. But on the basic level, you're gonna look at houses that lot size. A house that's on 100 by 150 is worth a lot more than a house that's on 50 by 100. Okay, number one, you can't put a bigger house on it. There's a lot of, different things that you can do with larger lots. To the size of the house, the square footage of the house, not including the basement, has an effect on value. Condition. The kitchen was done in 1995. They never cooked in it. It's a beautiful, gorgeous kitchen. The house next door put an $80,000, $100,000 kitchen in last week. Well, there's a conditional adjustment there. Same thing with bathrooms. So you're talking lot size, overall building size, condition of the improvements. How many bathrooms are in the house? Is there a basement versus no basement versus finished, and what the amenities are in the basement? Also, you have to look at attic space. A new rule came down through Fannie Mae. We have to measure everything to ANSI guidelines. Basically, what building code determines what living space is living space. If you walk down 2 steps, it's a basement. An attic, if it doesn't have 7-foot ceilings, it's an attic, not living space. So we've also, I don't know if you guys, but you got a lot of houses in
3 floors.
the 3 floors.
So,
There are some older houses in the 20s, they were full attic livable space. But a lot of those 16 by 36s on the 30 by 100s that you're gonna find down over there, that's attic space. Even though there's a fixed stair, because the ceiling is 6 foot 3 inches, when it's like this, you need to have a certain amount of headroom and a certain width. You need to have at least 6 to 7 feet wide and 7 feet high.
so you can use that square footage as a plus?
You can, if it meets that criteria.
It's above 7 feet.
If it's above 7 feet, it has the fixed stair, it has, it has,
DOB does not record it because it was done on stage 2 and blah, 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 blah.
yes. Okay, but how many have sold houses in the western part of Nassau County that were 2-bedroom bungalows, and then they fixed, and then it was, oh, there's the 3rd bedroom's in the attic. You know, you walk up and, you know, that's not living space, it's not a bedroom, it's an attic, that's finished.
You said if you go down 2 steps, it's a basement?
Yes, under the new, because under the ANSI standards, if anything is below grade, it's a basement.
How?
That's a problem. There's some, depending on the split, you have some front to back splits, you know, where you have that unfortunately measuring to ANSI standards has to be considered basement. Then every house that I'm comparing it to is gonna be compared to the same way. Every other split that I'm comparing it to is gonna have the same, it's gonna be compared similarly.
Right, so walk out in the backyard.
If you walk out like a high ranch that you just walk straight out, well, that's living space. If it's one of those raised ranches where you walk down, you know, a third of the floor is below grade, well, then it's basement.
Okay,
And that's ANSI standards, and we have to certify in that report that we measured and reported to ANSI standards. We can be sanctioned, we can lose our license if we mislead. If we mislead the bank, because the bank is relying on that appraisal to make its lending decision. If that appraisal can be misleading to the reader, and they make a lending decision based upon that appraisal, and it turns out to be, you know, a bad loan or something happens, they do a forensic review of that appraisal, guess what?
okay.
Attorneys are tree shakers. Whatever they shake, the first thing that falls out of the tree is what they go for. Who's the first to fall out of the tree? The appraiser.
No, how does,
Well, I mean, it's just the way it is. That's their job.
how does that apply on like a brownstone? Where you got the parlor label and then.
Well, you have the
first
parlor
floor-
label, you have the walk-in.
2 steps down, the parlor label, and
Okay.
then up the first floor, second, third.
Right. Your walk-in level is a basement. The level below
It's a cellar.
is a cellar,
Right,
and then you have your parlor, your second floor and third floor.
oh.
Now, you gotta remember something, in those situations, I'm comparing similar houses, so they're all gonna be the same.
Yes,
So I'm not gonna say, well, that house, it has a basement, but I don't know about that house next door that sold 3 months ago. It's the same house, so it's gonna be comparative, it's gonna have 3 levels and a basement and a cellar.
and I said, okay, so then the basement is a livable basement all the time? or
If-
not?
The way the state code works.
Mhm.
Now, like I said, New York City code, because they're a city over a million, they're allowed to have their own code. A lot of them adopt with the International Code Council or the ICC codes, like New York State has adopted the ICC code as their code.
Mhm.
New York City has done also, but they also have their own codes.
Mhm.
The way it works is if a level is 50% or more below grade, it's a cellar. Okay, and in certain jurisdictions, you're not allowed to have any bedrooms or sleeping in that cellar. If it's 50% or more above grade, like your standard Brooklyn brownstone, you walk down 3 steps, you know, it's 3 feet below grade, more than 50% of it's above grade. If you have egress windows, you can have it as living space or sleep in this, or have a sleeping room, as long as there's proper egress and all your life safety measures, such as smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. If you want to get into that, I got a lot of stories about that also, which is very important.
50% is there.
I have a question. I heard in Brooklyn,
Mhm.
they actually have a law, I don't know how true that, basement legalizing. Anyway, Queens gonna have that?
You can legalize a finished cellar, finished basement, finished cellar, you just can't sleep in it, you can't have a bedroom. Because every sleeping area has to have direct egress to the exterior. So that's why your houses with the bars on the windows. They have to have emergency hinges. They can't be locked, they can't be lockable. if you have, like, if they were put in 50 years ago and you got straight bars, well, one of the windows, if it has to be removed. Or changed to one that has emergency, and you can't have one that with a padlock, can't be keyed. Has to be with a thumb latch. Because in case of a fire and there's no key in there, you're stuck, you're trapped. So that's why if they have the window bars with the hinges, it has to be a thumb latch, can't be keyed. And otherwise you have to remove one.
Okay, well, good question.
I'm sorry, Sean.
Now, you were saying about all of this stuff, which I was so panels and all of this stuff, people being surprised. As a buyer, if I'm representing my buyer, then should I advise them to get that inspection before signing the contract? You said, yeah.
So there's some basics, and every time you're looking to buy a house or any property, you should be doing an inspection with a licensed inspector or an engineer or somebody of some licensed competence to inspect the home for you. That's important. Before the contract is signed by the buyer and down payment is issued, because once that down payment is issued, you've kind of accepted the conditions of the home. And you can't complain about it the day after the contract is signed.
unless he puts like a clause in the contract saying, well, based on the inspection, if I don't like it, you can put a clause like that.
Yeah, but that's.
Typically, once the inspection occurs, you should note your objections to seller, the seller's attorney, through the agents involved. It should be, it's not recommended, and it shouldn't be done this way, that you have an inspection done, you sign a contract, and then you reserve your right to back out. It defeats the purpose of this process. And it wastes everybody's time, especially when you have a very fickle, indecisive buyer that wants to milk the situation.
Can I add to that? A home inspector and the engineer are not going to the building department, the village, the town, or the city and checking to see if anything is legal. They're not checking to see if that extension is legal. They're not checking to see if the deck is legal. They're checking to see if it's structurally sound. And if it meets code, sometimes. It would behoove, and I tell this to a lot, every agent that I speak to, it would behoove you. Especially if you're doing work in a village. New York City's easy. You go on Acris, you go on the DOB website, you can pull up violations, you can pull up deed, you can do all that. But if you go right into Nassau, especially like you're on the north here, you got Great Neck right there. You have the town of North Hempstead, you got the village of Great Neck, you got Thomaston, you got, 6, 7, 8 villages in Great Neck. You need to go to the individual building department of each village. And I would say, pull the building file. Some villages don't require a FOIL. Town of North Hempstead requires you to fill a FOIL form. You fill out that form, they pull the whole file for you, they grab every file from the building department, and they bring it to you to review.
Can an agent do it?
An agent can do that. Okay, they do it all the time. Because, how many times at closing? Something, or 2 weeks before closing, that deck's not legal. That vestibule that's enclosed now with a closet is actually a porch on the building's website. That's gonna come up 2 weeks before closing. And now you're scrambling. Do you take a credit? How much is it gonna cost to legalize that? Well, depends on what other issues they have in the house. The architect alone is gonna cost you several $1,000s. The fees that the building department collects are nominal compared to what you're gonna pay the architect, the expediter, and all that stuff.
Great.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. All right, this is a really good question. Should you change the title company if you are not getting clearance to close?
That for you?
So the interaction between title and lending, when it comes to lending, we need to make sure certain items on public record and title are, solid for lending purposes. Issues like violations need to be paid and, liens, any sort of, mechanics lien, anything like this, all of that, UCCs, all that comes up for the title company, on the title report. As far as which title company should you use and all of that kind of thing. At the end of the day, and if, you know, I did a seminar on LEs and CDs and whoever was there with me. Title fees, title company is something that the buyer chooses, right? Buyers choose the title company.
Really, I thought it was fine.
No, we have nothing to do with the title company, absolutely zero. Now, I'm talking from the perspective of lending. The buyer chooses the title company,
Buyers are telling
period.
you.
Now, how many buyers know title companies? I've done a few deals where somebody's like, my aunt, you know, is a title person and that's how they do it. 9 times out of 10, it's whoever the buyer's attorney, you know, regularly works with, that's what they use. So the answer to that question, technically, can you change title company if you're not getting a clear close on the title end? Sure, it's your choice, because, and I want to make that clear, because the bank requires the title, we review the title report, and then, you know, we make sure everything is good for our purposes. Have I been on deals where lending is clear from a title perspective and we have an underwriting clear to close, but the title company wants something clear? Absolutely. And if the buyer wants to choose a different title company, have at it, choose a different title company.
So I have a weird energy, like asking me to answer this question as well. So I'll just put in a couple cents. It's title fees are the title report is going, title bill is going to show a lot of closing costs that the buyers are going to cringe at. Between the mortgage recording charges, processing costs, title costs, those are the majority of a buyer's closing costs.
Mortgage tax.
The mortgage tax, the management title, okay. That title bill, we sometimes say, well, change the title company, it'll be different. Before 2015, 16, it may have been worth to shop around title companies for a cheaper title bill. In 2017, maybe you remember this, Governor Cuomo almost standardized all title charges, the premiums, the surcharges. So to jump between title companies to save some money may not be helpful, but the question was, if you're not getting a clearance to close, should you change your title company? Now, what is a title company? There's a title agency that the buyers should be choosing, buyers attorney should be choosing to ensure that they are buying a house free and clear of legal issues, liens, judgments, mortgages, I mean, anything under the sun, open permits, lack of CO, some of the other issues that we discussed today. So when these reports come in, every title company is going to should be showing you the same report. If one title company shows you there are violations on a property and another one doesn't, that's a big problem. The one that's not showing you violations, is it because they haven't done their full searches? And when you close with them, you're gonna be hit up for those violations? Or is it because that new title company found the satisfaction of those violations? It could go both ways. If you're not getting a clearance to a close, and that's what everybody's waiting on, the bank depends on the title company. I don't think that the lender would have a preference if you jump title companies, as long as they're getting omissions and clearances on the outstanding issues. So if you happen to have a title company willing to resolve open issues for you that another title company would not do for you, maybe you want to consider changing at that point. For example, maybe one title company is willing to take extra money on the side in escrow to allow you to deal with the violation after closing, just close tomorrow.
Yeah.
They can do that. Another title company may not give you that flexibility. So depending on what the issues are, you may want to switch title companies, but you have to be aware. Switching title companies, you may have a lower grade underwriter, which may be important for you to have a higher grade underwriter, because if God forbid you get hit with huge fines or huge liabilities in the future, you want to make sure that title company is going to cover you and not leave you holding the bag.
Last question for today. I know you guys know it's work and they did an outstanding job. If you need to evict a tenant after closing, can you start the eviction before the closing? Can you start the process?
The complex answer is no, you can't start an eviction until you are the owner. But another way to approach it is, if the current owner will work with you, you can start the eviction process with the current owner, because it takes time to get into court and deal with a lot of the court process. the current owner can start the case for you while they are the owners. And there's a proper way to assign the case to the new owner as a successor in interest. So there are ways to do that in order to save some time.
What if there's a lease and so there's a lease until we close in April and the lease is, it's live.
Give me those dates again. What's in April?
Okay, so let's say, my seller has already. The lease ends in September, the tenant's paying. And then I have a buyer that wants to buy it, so the new buyers, which are the new owners, do they have to honor that lease?
Yeah.
Until May?
Because you're buying it subject to that tenancy, and if there's a lease in effect, you're gonna be assuming that lease.
And how long typically an eviction takes?
It really depends on, it depends on how litigious and aggressive the tenant wants to be. Look,
If the tenant is flexible.
I'll tell you right now, on Tuesday, I just executed a warrant on an eviction on a 2019 index number. Because the case that got stuck in the COVID process. And the tenant did everything under the sun, really nasty things. They filed for bankruptcy, they filed an appeal until we dragged them out. So, but if you start a new case now, you have to give yourself 8 months to a year, or 8 to 14 months on average.
8 to 14 months. Guys, you hear it? 8 to 14 months.
And you find New York state laws are very tenant friendly.
Yes. New York City, no.
New York
Yeah.
City,
New York City.
I'm looking for some reading, they seem to be
They've-
tenant friendly.
They've, okay, the laws have always been on the landlord's side. The housing court has always been on landlord's court. But since 2019, Governor Cuomo issued the Housing Stability Tenant Protection Act, which is not New York City wide, it's statewide, which made it very difficult for landlords to evict tenants. COVID and the laws that followed COVID made it even harder. And no, it's a tenant friendly town. Let's put it that way.
Last question. Tenant, good,
Good, I guarantee.
no, the other one, other tenant, good, tenant, cool.
Good cause evictions.
Thank you, what does it mean?
That means our industry is gonna go down the sewer.
Yeah, we're not kidding.
That's what's gonna happen. And I'm not being political, it's gonna go to hell.
What is it, does it mean that the landlord has to show cause for it, what is it?
Today, if you don't have a lease and you are not a rent regulated or rent stabilized tenant, rent controlled, rent stabilized. The landlord, the owners of the building can ask you to leave at any time if you don't have a lease in effect. If you don't have a lease. If you're rent controlled, rent stabilized, you're gonna have the automatic renewals unless you are violating those lease terms. Now, if you're not rent stabilized, not rent controlled. And you don't have a lease, right now you can ask your tenant to leave, you can start an eviction process, and it's called a no lease. Tenant has no defenses to this holdover case. And it's one of the easiest cases for a landlord to win and to have the tenant removed. If the legislature passes the no good cause eviction,
Even they got.
it's just gonna make it almost impossible to evict somebody from a 2-3 family home. Yeah, it's gonna make it 10 times harder.
What does that mean? They're gonna live there for, they're gonna stay there?
What they're trying to do is create a system where even tenants of free market apartments are entitled to lease renewals. And that's a problem, which makes it harder for you to sell a home that has 2-3 units.
But how about if,
I'm sorry, you mentioned something about Brooklyn and legalizing
Yeah,
basements. I'm gonna say this very quickly. There is a potential pilot program. I don't know if it's in effect yet. It's something they're working on. Because big, and Leah, you and I spoke about this, or maybe Salman, because big landlords around the city are really upset at what the 2019 laws did. They are now withholding apartments
Yeah.
from the market. There are currently almost 50,000 vacant apartments.
They don't wanna rent.
They don't want to rent them because to rent them, they have to renovate them. But if they renovate them, they cannot increase the rents to recoup the renovation costs. So big landlords, the big boys, they've withheld these apartments at a time that overlaps where New York City has a housing crisis, affordable housing crisis. They have a problem with homelessness. So the city needs the apartments, but the big developers, big property managers are withholding them to teach the government a lesson. So they're not putting these on the market. So what the pilot part of the program is trying to do is create legalized basements to free up some space to create more apartment vacancies. But I don't know where that program is yet, but that was the purpose of it. It's really on a policy level, in Albany.
Okay, so another question, quick, all tenants, for instance, they have a lease, this expire from two family. They don't wanna leave, you cannot ask them after that new law. You cannot make them leave.
So there's a lot of proposals in that law. And it depends on how this law is going to be finalized. They tried to do this in 2018 with the 2019 Housing Stability Tenant Protection Act, but Governor Cuomo purposely took it off because if he included it, that entire law would not have gone into effect. It would have been the deal breaker. So now that that law is in effect, now that the COVID laws are in effect, now they're trying to push this again.
So what's gonna happen, my question, if tenant doesn't pay after 2000, what you have to do, right? What's gonna happen? They're gonna stay after, or can you evict them, or can you give a time frame?
So you're bringing up two different scenarios. If their lease has expired, or if they're not paying. If they're not paying, the process will stay the same. You remove your tenant through an eviction process for not paying the rent. But the more complicated part of your question is, if it's a 2-3 family home and they have no lease in effect, can you get them out? And we have to,
And then they're paying.
If they pay,
if they're
you
paying,
cannot get them out.
depending on how this law is finalized, it may become very difficult to get it out.
But can you increase down the road if they're not living, can you increase the amount, or it's also gonna be capped?
They may be trying to cap it, which creates like this problematic socializing of private property.
So if you have a if you have a two-family house and you convert the basement to a living space, those are technically means you have to, whatever it's described as a 3-family house. Instead of
I think you'd have to get clearance for another unit or a new CO.
Right, if a house is a legal 2-family.
Right.
And like, we'll take that townhouse thing with the garage, with the walk-in on the first floor and then 2 apartments above it.
Yes.
Okay, and then you put a kid, somebody put a kitchen down there and made it a studio or 1 bedroom. Still legally, a 2-bedroom, a 2-family house with an accessory dwelling unit.
We,
An accessory dwelling unit.
so that makes it.
It can be appraised that way, especially if it's common in the neighborhood conventionally.
Yes.
FHA. Oh, different can of worms,
Okay.
okay? Conventionally, it's also up to the lender when they underwrite it, if they want to have that accessory dwelling unit, they can still ask to have that removed.
Okay.
Okay, the appraiser never asks for something to be removed. If we appraise property that has a life safety issue, smoke and carbon monoxide detectors must be in there. Conventional, FHA, everything. We have to take pictures of them. We have to actually verify if they're carbon monoxide and smoke detectors, if they're in the right location. Stuff like that, we can require as a condition of the appraisal. As far as removing the kitchen, we state that it's there. We state if it, the legal use of the house is a 2-family, it's set up like a 3-family. It's above grade, it's not in the basement. There are some other houses that are similar, have a similar setup. It's up to the lender if they lend on that or not, or if they want to have that 3rd kitchen removed.
What about if the gas appliances are disconnected? How does that enter into the equation?
Plug in and plug in a stove.
Excuse me, I just wanted to actually, an actual case. My mother was evicted of tenant back in September 2019. The attorney immediately sent for not paying because he wasn't paying, he was in arrears 4 months. So he moved out March after, they put the legal notice on the door, March 7, 2020, right before the week of COVID. By that time, I had already gone to the courthouse, followed the paperwork. Because the attorney said, okay, if he moved out, now I can't evict him because he's already out, but we're gonna demand for payment. So I went after that
procedure, because the attorney said, you do it yourself, I don't know why, because he sent me to another attorney, but the attorney said, just go file the paperwork, do this, do that, I followed his instructions. I went to the courthouse, filed the paperwork, COVID happened, and then, they told me, go to the marshal's office in Bayside, I did, file the paperwork, thank them so much, file the paperwork, make the payments, and this was a year ago. Just last week, here's the letter, marshal's office said, the paperwork that I gave them, which was fine, but the money, the account, they can't find the account. He pulled out the money from the account, so it's, basically, we were out of money. But it took, just to say, from 2019, to answer the question, when I started the paperwork, September 2019 until now, this month. That's how long the courthouse was able to hold it. They said, just wait, we're doing nothing, so the courthouse is closed. That was happening. Yes.
Guys, thank you so much for coming. Take them out and introduce yourself.